everyone, and welcome to another board game review by ThinkerThemer. I'm Amy, this is my wonderful fiance Maggie.
Hello.
And together we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about and love the mechanics, and Maggie is all about the story or the theme. Today we're really excited to be reviewing a copy of SHASN by Zane Memon and his company Memeses. And this was a game that was originally on Kickstarter. We have been provided with a review copy, but all of our opinions, as always, are as authentic as we can possibly be about our experiences of this game. Now, this game is a really interesting game because it's a game that consists of modules, but ultimately these modules are going to bring the theme to this very abstract stage where we're going to see some political theatre.
Yeah, so in SHASN, we all play as politicians right in the middle of our campaign trail. Do you call it a campaign trail? I think it is. Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to be doing is, well, the aim is to try and win this election. The way we do that is by getting the most voters across the largest number of different areas, or I believe it's constituencies that they call them. And the way that we're going to do that is going to be through, well, making some very key political stances and decisions around some key issues and sometimes controversial sort of social problems and the like. And in exchange, we're going to get some wonderful resources in the form of funds or clout or trust, or what's the other one? Media. Yeah, media attention.
Media. You need the media on your side to win an election.
Yes. And so the way this is going to work is you're going to have a campaign based on a particular, usually country and political stage. So that could be either India, for example, 2019, 2020, or the USA in that similar period. And that's going to be what's going to dictate the types of questions or the types of issues that you as a politician are going to have to obviously take a stand on.
Now, no matter which theme you choose to apply to this political setting, the game itself mechanically plays out the same way every time. So as you can see from the look of this central board, it's all about area control. So these different areas on the board represent different constituencies of which you are trying to, I guess, influence the most voters and have the majority of voters in these areas. Now, the little pegs that go in are in each of the players' colors, and different actions throughout the game are going to allow you to add voters to the board and move them around and try to manipulate the game state such that you can flip them over once you have reach this majority number that is written on the board. So for example, this area here requires you to have 9 out of the 17 peg holes taken, or voters thematically, to be able to claim that as your own. At the end of this game, every voter that is turned up to its majority side, showing that you have majority voters in that area, is going to count as 1 victory point. And ultimately, the person who has the most victory points or majority voters in the game is going to be victorious. Now, how do you get there? The way this game works is all about a kind of a choose your own adventure style game where the person before you is going to be reading out a question on a card from this little box of cards that represents the theme that you're playing. So it's giving you a situation or I guess a political question where you are going to have to say yes or no. So do you think that something should be legal? Do you think that we should pay for this type of thing? Do you think we should build a new rail network between these two places? Yeah. And you are effectively going to have to make choices along the way. Now, rather than always take the path that aligns with your own personal political view, what's interesting about this game is the answer that you pick determines which ideology you are answering as. And this game all centers around 4 different ideologies. There's the capitalist, the supremo, the showstopper, and the idealist. And so every answer is aligned with one of those political views and is going to give you resources according to those different ideologies. So for example, if I said yes to, I guess, leveraging a situation to make money, that might be a very capitalist answer, which would give me more resources, more green resources or funds resources, and the card itself would show the capitalist on that side with that answer. that becomes a tableau. So I would be adding that card into the appropriate slot underneath each one of these ideologies. And as you collect more of each type of card, a few different things happen. So one thing that happens is for every pair of the same ideology that you have, you're going to be earning a resource of that type passively every time your turn comes around. The second thing is that once you have 3 or 5 of the same ideology cards, you get to activate these really powerful kind of game rule breaking powers that allow you more influence over this kind of political stage here. You're going to be able to shift more of the pieces around, discard voters from other players. You're going to get a discount for influencing other voters. But basically, you're going to be working towards getting all of these powers. So the other thing is when you make a choice and you're aligning yourself with a political ideology, when you're making that choice in your mind about what answer to give, you are thinking, as I said, not only about what you actually feel in response to that question, but what resources do I need? Which creates like an interesting tension because you might say yes to something that normally in real life you wouldn't, in order to get the resources that you need, because you're going to need resources to, in effect, but purchase or influence voters. And that is these voter cards that are unchanging depending on what theme you apply in this game. They're always the same. This deck is going to give you options for 3, 2, or 1 voters. And of course, if you want to influence 3 voters, it's going to cost more resources than if you were to influence 1. Once you do that, you are taking some more pegs out of your little bag according to the number of voters that you've just purchased with resources. The resources go back to the bank, of course, and then you'll be placing them out onto the board. But that's not the only thing that you can do on your turn. You can also use your resources to buy conspiracy cards, which are usually one-off effects that are quite powerful and beneficial for you. But they do cost, for example, this top card here is going to cost 5 resources, so they're quite expensive. But you can also bank them and use them when the timing is right, so they're quite powerful. And then there's this thing called a headline card. That comes into effect. Those are highly thematic because headlines are around kind of the big news stories that were going on during this political period. But those are triggered when you put a voter into one of these volatile areas. If a voter goes into if one of your voters goes or someone else's goes into one of these volatile areas, they cannot be moved out of that area. Even if you have the most powerful powers, they will be stuck there forever. But what you pay in order to take that spot where you can't be, pushed around or moved out of it, you get a headline card, you read it to the entire table, and it usually has quite a strong event effect that either can hurt you or bring you some benefits, but you never really know which way it's going to go. Yeah. Now, the only other thing to talk about here is really concerning the area control portion of the game. I won't go into too much detail, but I will say that as soon as you reach the minimum number of voters required to turn them over and gain control over that area, it becomes much harder for other players to be able to manipulate your voters in that area to make you lose control again. So it is ideal to try and aim towards those majorities. There's one more action that you can do on your turn where anywhere where you have the majority of voters in that area, you get the opportunity to gerrymander, which means that you can move some pegs around according to the adjacencies from your voting area. So you might push one out or pull one in, and that will help you manipulate the game state.
So let's talk a little bit about how thematically immersive this felt to me. This is, well, first off, if you look at it, the production is absolutely stunning. It's really, really beautiful. I love the all of the components. The artwork is spot on. The pegs, the little different bags, the little bags that you put the pegs into, the double layer board. I do find a little bit, sometimes it can be a bit finicky when you're swapping the pegs in and out because they're a bit small. But by and large, the presence, the table presence of it is absolutely beautiful. The campaigns themselves, they have been written by people who are experts in those particular areas. So they're actually quite thoroughly researched, and they are quite, you kind of get it's very good writing. There's a good sense of content. The content is sort of solid.
It's funny as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of, because it's sort of, with those answers, they're fitting you into one of the different boxes. They can be quite extreme in their views. If you give a yes or a no to a particular issue, it might make you very much a hard capitalist or a big idealist. And the explanation as to why yes, because blah, 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 that is actually really, really well done and really funny in a lot of cases.
Yeah, likewise with the headline cards. I think when something happens and it explains like why it happened, it's quite entertaining from especially when we're playing the future pack. It was explaining what had happened in the future and then this position that you were all being put in. And yeah, I found the writing really clever as well. I was really surprised you actually gelled with this theme so much. When we originally came across this game, I thought it would be something that you wouldn't enjoy.
So did I.
Political.
Yeah.
But I think you were really getting into it.
Yeah. I thought, area control and all of that I don't tend to enjoy, but the area control of this, I think it's because it happens, it's very thematic in the way that it kind of unfolds. And also the questions, they're just a yes or no question. So it's, and you kind of get to that point where you are kind of going, oh, what resources do I need? And kind of gauging, well, probably this answer will give me more trust or will bring me more clout or whatever it is. So I did thoroughly enjoy that a lot more.
And I was thinking, because when you look at this game, it looks abstract, which makes you think, okay, maybe like the thinker is going to enjoy this more. But actually, so much of this game is very conversational. It's actually not, the funniness and the interaction doesn't often take place on the board itself. It takes place in the conversations that you're having with your friends, because you're reading to each other and answering the questions. It's very heady. Which I think for you really works, because you're very like an auditory person. And so then it made sense why you got into the theme so much, because we're all talking about what's going on and adding that thematic overlay to all of the actions. Whereas if you were just playing it and reading it to yourself, it wouldn't have that same storiness. There's like a storytelling that's going on in this game.
I know when a game is really thematic, when you can figure out a rule by going, wait, but what's the name of the card? And that'll explain it. Like it'll be self-evident. And I remember there was one moment where that happened, where someone was trying to stop somebody else. And it was like, oh, would it apply in this scenario? And I believe the line was like, the name of the card was, do you even know who my parents are? Yeah. And it's like, yes, that would trump this other thing. Like that would definitely stop whatever that other thing would be.
Yeah.
So I think, for me, I actually really enjoy that.
Yeah. What was really funny as well is when we were playing this, one of our friends kept skipping the flavor text and just reading what happened as a result of it. And I could tell you were getting so frustrated, because you're like, but why?
Yeah.
Why are those brochures being removed? And actually, when you then explain the flavor text is so well written and so well tied in with what's happening on the board, that I found that was like really the highlight of this game. But anyway, we should talk about how we do feel about this game. I agree with you that like it's just stunning. Everything about this board is beautiful, and the production has been so thoughtful.
Yeah, the box itself.
The box itself,
it's just beautiful.
It's absolutely beautiful. But I guess this game has been designed to provoke opinions, provoke political discussion, to engage with topical issues, and to have these conversations with your friends. And I personally enjoyed it, but I think that we were very careful about the group that we played with. So
absolutely.
So when we heard this was a political game, we know we have some friends that are actually, quite interested in current affairs and politics, and we thought this would be a perfect experience with them, and it absolutely was. They loved the theme, and on top of that, this area control game in the middle. But I think this game, for us, what did I enjoy the most about this game? I think it was just that interaction with people. It was less about the game. Mechanically, it's actually quite simple. But that ability to have a conversation, and a lot of the writing is so funny that you just spend a lot of the time laughing. We had a really great time with this, and it was exciting to open up a new theme pack, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did find myself looking forward to, I wonder what what will unfold story-wise in this. Because yeah, there's a lot of narrative, which usually you don't like. You don't like when things are being read out and there's story. But because in here is so, it's not intrusive, it's just very much a question and a quick sort of rationale as to why the answer gives you one thing or the other. It works really, really well.
Yeah, so yeah, and I'm not usually into narrative, but because the narrative in this game has a kind of, the answer gives you the resources you need. It's very tightly it's tightly aligned with the mechanics in the game, which means that when you asked me a question, I am thinking about it thematically, I guess, but mostly it's just a means to an end to try and get the right resources I need. And also, like, the area control is enough player interaction. It's very high player interaction because not only are you talking to each other, but there's a lot of like push and pull going on in the area control, as is usual in an area control game. And also then you are collecting conspiracy cards, and we should say actually that some of those cards can have quite a negative effect on other players. So you will be able to discard people's or evict people's voters. You will be able to steal resources from other players in a lot of instances. So for us, that makes this game a little bit more niche in terms of who we would be able to play this game with. Probably it needs to be people who you have a healthy respect for their politics with. If you imagine if you sat down and played one of these decks of cards with people who had a diverse range of political opinions, it would be a very different experience to probably your close-knit family and friends who you might have very similar ideologies.
Even potentially family could be a bit tricky.
It could be tricky. It just depends on how aligned you are politically. And so for that reason, I would not recommend this to everybody, but we certainly had a great time with it because we picked the right friends to sit down and play this with. And we also knew that we would be able to, those friends can deal with a bit of that kind of take that element that occurs in these games. The other thing I was going to say is in terms of the cards themselves, there are some trigger warnings, but I feel like they were usually more around sort of either pornographic things or sex-related content things, whereas there were a lot of other issues that are actually quite potentially triggering that didn't have any kind of flag, and they should so again, it's another kind of warning of when you're going to play this, being very careful as to who you pick, and potentially if it's something you're concerned that might be quite triggering, not ideal, but I might actually even have a look through the cards beforehand. And so this was my main issue with these cards, because I felt like it's a fine balance between wanting to have a conversation about a topic and really upsetting or offending people around the table. And sometimes it's just an external situation where different politics could play out in different ways in terms of their opinion about that. For example, something very benign like, should we build, a fast rail somewhere, for example. Everyone's going to have different opinions about that. Or should we incentivize this type of business from operating? And, that's you can have healthy discussion about that. I think most of the time they got the balance right. But there were a few cards where I would actually question whether they should be in there or not. For example, there were a couple of cards that spoke about homosexuality or being trans in a way that made it seem like it was kind of up for debate. And, we have strong views about this, but, it was okay in the safety of the setting of our friends. But I could imagine that if there was a mixed group of people from diverse backgrounds, some of those questions could be actually really uncomfortable for the person who's reading it out because there might be other people or themselves who identify with that minority group that's being mentioned. Those cards I could have done without. They didn't have a trigger warning, and I felt like it probably wasn't. I understand that, yes, you want to talk about these topics, but any cards that really could upset someone around the table, I'm not super keen on that.
I agree.
So it makes it a bit tricky because you will need to go through these packs of cards in advance to find any topics like that.
Which kind of ruins some of the surprise element, because a big part of the enjoyment of this is having that surprise. If you don't know what question's going to come up, and then you're like, oh yeah, what would be my answer in this scenario? And
Yeah. And yeah, anyway, so I guess some of the pack, we played through quite a few of these packs. We played through India, which was kind of interesting because we know nothing about it. And so some of the topics that were raised were like, wow. But then in another sense, it was almost like it was a little bit abstracted because we didn't know enough about it.
Directly invested in it or like part of it or not have enough context. And
but
so
it was a bit educational.
Exactly. Because I found it really educational. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that would have been the equivalent of the conservative view in that in that place or in that setting.
And so it was harder maybe to guess what the answer would be. We played the Brexit UK pack, which was an optional add-on in the Kickstarter, and that one, it was a bit easier for us to guess which ideology were aligned with each of the topics. But then we also played like the future of humanity, which takes place in Earth 2040, which means that the topics that came up were kind of really out there, you know, about gene manipulation or privacy and data and all those types of things, where it wasn't as clear which ideology, you know, because they were having to predict how the different political parties would align with those things, that it was much harder to guess which card you needed, you know, to get the resources that you wanted. There's also the fall of the Republic in this game, which is Rome in 40 BCE, which obviously is going to be, again, really similar, different.
I think, where you not necessarily know what were the views at the time and how would that have sort of, which way would that have fallen.
We were also able to try this game out at 2 players. There's no solo mode, but 2 players, 3 players, and 4 players. And, you know, as an area control game, it does shine at 4 in terms of the area control part. But it goes on a little bit long.
I feel like it went a bit long at 3 and 4. And the reason for that is towards the end, it just, because you're doing the same thing, you're reading something out and then you're putting your pegs around and then mechanically there's no newness or variety that's taken place. And so when you're sort of getting to the point where it's just really, you're almost just waiting for a couple of those territories to be overtaken or for the majorities to be fully triggered. And then just kind of feels like you're kind of playing it out. So I do almost feel like for the sake of tension that that things would come to a conclusion a little bit quicker.
I wish the game was a little bit shorter, but at the same time, having more players also means more interaction on the board, which is far more interesting than in a 2-player game where you could just be, you know, operating very opposite ends of the board. So it's not as like the game status not changing as much as you would expect from an area control game. However, there was the option, I believe you can still access. There is a special 2 to 3 player board, which is an optional cost extra to this game. It shrinks down the areas on the board, but interestingly, it adds one really cool thing, which is a deck of cards that you draw randomly and apply to each of the areas on the board, which sets a condition for which you must meet before you're able to take control of that area. I thought that was really clever, and I really enjoyed our 2-player games of this because of that new board.
Yeah, I agree. It added an extra layer of strategy, of having to think in advance of, before I can actually take over that area, I'm going to have to do these other things. Or I'm going to have to make sure that I have these resources on my board or whatever it is. So I did enjoy that because it felt like it added, a new layer of strategy that you don't get if you're not playing with that. It's just, you sort of get the same old.
So for me, I think my pick would be a 3-player game on the 2 to 3 player game board with those additional conditions. That is where I think the game would really shine. Even at 2 players, it ran a little bit long. But I really do appreciate that. Love the new board. The presidential edition on Kickstarter did come with more of the campaigns and a few extras. If you can seek out the Kickstarter edition of this game, it does come with a number of optional modules or expansions for the game, some of which are just a bit of flavor and additional art. The artwork on this game is so incredible that the more art the better. But some of the additional things it adds, like the elites, they're really interesting. They are like one-off power cards that come true when you've got a certain mix of ideology cards. So if you go really strong on 2 ideologies and nothing else, it activates this elite political member.
It's like a persona that then you like take on, that is the combination of those 2 things.
Which is really thematic and really cool. And it gives you this ongoing benefit until your your board state changes and you lose that power again. There's also like some other additional little boards and different things going on to give a lot of replayability to this game, because it does rely heavily on those different campaigns. And once you've played out the campaign, it would be a bit harder to get it to the table, I imagine, because the newness and the variety for me was really coming from those cards that we had no idea that were coming.
I felt like you can probably get 2 games per campaign box, because even at a 3 and a 4 player count, we probably got through like 3/4 of the cards. And so you could play, you know, your second game with the cards that you haven't used, and then kind of throwing in a few of the ones that you may have already seen. But I think for me, the replayability would come into like, this new never-ending campaign. So every new campaign box that gets released is like, oh, great, you know, let's check out this scenario. So it's that discovery.
Yeah, so that is the summary of our review. It is a game that we highly recommend and really did enjoy. Something so unlike anything else in our collection. That ability to have that base layer abstract game and then overlay it with all this rich thematic detail that has been so expertly written and is really, really funny, with the caveat of, you know, it does push buttons. It was intended to push buttons, and it really does. So just be really mindful of who you find to sit around the table for this one. Absolutely proceed with caution. And, you know, this is a game that plays out mostly off the table. So just, are you someone who really likes to engage in that social element of games as well? Think about that before you pick up SHASN. But if this is your type of theme, then highly recommend you give it a try. That is our review of SHASN. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this review, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game reviews soon. But bye for now.
Bye.